Welcome Internet to Psychologist Casual Review, and today we're going to be reviewing Understanding the Borderline Mother, Helping the Children Transcend the Intense, Unpredictable and Volatile Relationship by Christine Ann Lawson. So this book is very interesting and very, very subtle in what it presents. And Christine Ann Lawson takes the framework of explaining the borderline phenomena through fairy tales and through, for lack of a better word, archetypal ideas through the text. So here she's not using Jung, but really the fairy tales, as she feels, because she's going to insist on the relationship between mother-child. One of the first mediums the child grows up with is fairy tales. Like you have the bad witch, you have the princess, you have the knight, and so on and so forth. So she's going to expand and elaborate on those fairy tales. So she's going to divide the borderline individual into 4 subtypes. Here you have to understand that the borderline she's going to be talking about is a borderline mother and perhaps a father, but we'll talk about that a bit later on in the review. The fundamental idea is that in this book it's going to be borderline as it touches to maternity and paternity, and the implication for the children and for the environment in general. So she starts off very interestingly enough by explaining what is borderline, and she explains it very well and in a language that is accessible to everyone, the professionals obviously, but also the lay people. So very good introduction. She explains that at the core of the borderline there is a fear of abandonment. There is what she calls a darkness. That darkness is something that prevents the individual with borderline to have a stable identity, to have a stable sense of security. That there's always moments of anxiety that are going to spark and create acting outs, that are going to create an unmanageable form of anxiety for the individual. And in the case of borderline mothers, unfortunately that volatility is there with the relationship with the child. For her, it's very important to understand that the darkness of the borderline mother impacts the child. You have to understand that because the whole book is built around this framework of understanding that what happens to the parent, how the parent experiences life, impacts the child. She does also say, and it is very true, that when the infant is born, the infant knows nothing. Therefore, they are in a state of vulnerability, and the first individual that they start adapting to is the parent, the caregiver, the primary caregiver, which in most cases, even nowadays in our societies, is the mother. So we have this framework, right? And in this framework of fears of abandonment, anxiety, instability of the self, inability to cope with one's emotions, sometimes paranoid feelings, all of that is going to transcend just the individual. It's going to go beyond and go into the child. So she delimitates 4 types of borderline. So the first borderline she talks about is the WAIF, WAIF, right? So for her, the WAIF borderline is a borderline who at the core has become desperate. I'm going to state it with my understanding. It's a borderline with depressive symptoms, which feels that life is too much, that she can't cope, and that life is just unbearable in the fact that it crushes. Her hopes are ditched. She doesn't really feel that she can make a difference. She doesn't feel that she's in control, in power of her life, and thus that vision of the world expands to her child. A child that's often going to be seen as an expansion of her, like life is too hard for us, for the both of us. Therefore, we need each other. We can't break apart. We can't separate because we need each other to face off against life together. Even though, quote unquote, we will lose, we still need each other. That's the only way we can make it even a bit of the way. So at that moment, the child becomes dependent upon the mother, but the mother herself often has had a mother, so a grandmother in the vision of the child, who has led to anxieties and abandonment issues that has triggered down. And the WAIF is often kind of clueless. She feels that she's trying things, but she doesn't feel there's stick. She doesn't feel like a cohesive individual. She very quickly abandons or gives up, and she wants other people to take care of her. That's at the core what she needs and what she wants. And those needs are linked to the fact that her herself has experienced neglect, has experienced abandonment when she was a child. Therefore, she doesn't feel that she has the tools to cope, let alone help a child to cope with the world. Therefore, it creates a symbiotic relationship where it's please don't separate, if not, I'm gonna die. So the child has to stay put with the mother. So that's the first, it's the waif. Then she has the hermit. So the hermit is very interesting because it's a borderline individual with paranoid tendencies. So those paranoid tendencies manifest through the fact that it's not that life is too hard, it's others are a danger, they're a threat. You never know what they want, you never know what they think. And therefore the borderline individual becomes hypersensitive to what is perceived as a menace or a threat, when in fact that might not be the case. So the hermit borderline will withdraw within oneself, will start being suspicious of others, people, neighbors, even schools, and so on and so forth, and even her children, if the children do not comply with her, because she will feel that the child taking a distance from her is basically very persecutory. That means that the child has turned on her, wants to hurt her. Therefore, the hermit is going to be very, very skeptical of any separation. She's going to really see that as a form of threatening of her identity, not in the fact that it's letting go of someone, therefore there's a collapse. It's more like the person goes, therefore they can betray me. So it's everything is seen through this lens of betrayal. Betrayal is around the corner. No one can be trusted. And it impacts, obviously, the child, which is going to internalize the fact that the world is a scary place. No one ought to be trusted. Therefore, their emotions are going to be pent up, and anything expressed will be seen as a vulnerability that the outside world can exploit. Therefore, vulnerabilities have to be shushed, have to be quietened down in order to be able to survive this threatening world. So then we move on to the queen borderline. The queen borderline is a borderline with narcissistic tendencies. So it's the borderline that feels that nothing is ever enough, that she deserves the very best, and that others have to sacrifice themselves for her. Like they have to be there, they have to be their extensions, they have to give her what she wants and what she needs, because her herself has lacked a profound care in her childhood. She always tries to get that out of people in adulthood, always trying to get a narcissistic glow up through others. One of the very interesting examples that Lawson gives in her text of a queen borderline is Mary Todd Lincoln. Yes, the wife of Abraham Lincoln, which apparently spent enormous amounts of money for the time on trivial things, but things that she wanted, like jewelry, like clothes, even something as minor as a ruban in French, like just a piece of fabric, right? And she spent enormous amounts, and she felt that she was worth it, and she was worth every single penny. She even, as a child, told her father, "I will be in the White House." And she did marry someone that eventually got into the White House. So there you go. She got her dream fulfilled, but that didn't change anything to her personality, because everything was due. So, I mean, there was no negotiation. Her narcissism, her self-esteem was linked with what others could bring to the table for her in what she asked for, and no one could stray away from what she asked for. Her son, Robert Lincoln, tried to put a limit, and that became explosive. She repudiated him. She hated him for trying to find a solution, because she was overspending when her husband died, Abraham Lincoln. So he tried to intern her, and that backfired monumentally, because queen borderlines cannot be controlled, and you shouldn't even try. It's more like you have to understand that they want everything. Everything is not enough. I can't stretch this enough. So that everything that they want is not a matter of negotiation. It's a matter of fact. They have to have what they ask for, and they want nothing less because they've been deeply hurt during their own childhood. Now, the effect upon children is that the children might develop very submissive behavior, in which they feel that they have to fulfill mother's needs in spite of their own. They have to be there and become what mother asks for. For example, prototypically, narcissistic mothers, or narcissistic borderline mothers, as I understand it, the queen borderline, right, will ask of her child to be, for example, a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, some fancy profession, right, which is socially connoted positively, which she's going to be able to show off. So in a way, she uses her child as a show-off tool, something that is used to glow her up rather than to support the child emotionally and in his desires. It's like, no, you don't follow your desires, you respect mine. And that's something that can be very detrimental, as children of the borderline queen might develop a deep sense of false self because they feel that they can't be genuine. If not, mother will no longer love them, mother will no longer take care of them. Therefore, they learn very early on how to mask and how to hide their desires to fulfill mothers. Because if they show their own desires, the borderline queen is not going to take kindly to it. She's going to try and shut them out, and if they can't be shut out, she might abandon or reject. So you can see here that it's vital for the child to develop a false self, a mask, in order to hide who they truly are. And sometimes that hiding can go so poorly or so well for the borderline queen, but so poorly for the individual, that they forget who they truly are and what are their deepest desires. Now, moving on to the fourth type of borderline, the borderline witch. So my understanding is that the borderline witch is a borderline individual that's has psychopathic traits. That she's the borderline that's going to go, it's in my way and I'm going to destroy it. She's the borderline that will not put up with anything that goes against her will. She would rather destroy what goes against her rather than manipulate or reject or become depressive. She will just destroy. So the pinnacle example of the witch borderline that Lawson gives is Susan Smith, which is a real person. She's still alive now. And she said that Susan Smith, and I fact-checked this so it's accurate, basically Susan Smith, killed her children. Why? Because she wanted to marry another man, and that man was not interested in having a relationship if the two children were still around. So what did she do? She drowned her children. So here we have those mothers that are Median, in the fact that even though it's very rare to ever have a mother kill her children, it does in fact happen, and it happens because the child is seen as an obstacle. It's not something that can bring her anything, therefore it needs to be discarded. It also might be children might be used as tools, as objects for revenge on a husband, on a parent, and so on and so forth. The borderline witch is inherently very dangerous when she's open. So what Lawson says is that the borderline witch might not be always present. Like she can be one of the other three borderlines, and sometimes have moments where it's do or die, right? But it's only spikes. The consistent borderline witch, however, it's going to have a massive impact on children. Those children are going to have to completely hide who they are. Like we're talking about the false self, it goes one step further here, in the fact that often those children feel a closeness to people who have experienced the Holocaust or concentration camps, that they had to undergo something of the same ilk. of if the desire was shown for something else, for separation, for anything that the witch was not in agreement with, they would be destroyed, brutalized, violented. There would be no limits to what the witch could do to them. Therefore, they internalized very, very early on that if ever the true self was to shine, it would be annihilated. It's not even that the mother could not accept it, it's that the mother will destroy it. And that destructivity is something that the child understands on a very deep emotional level. Therefore, they're going to close off and just be like a prisoner in a prison. Just follow orders and just try and survive. And that's the name of the game with the children of the witch. They just have to survive. And you might ask, now, in all of this, where are the fathers? Well, Lawson also have categories for the fathers. So for the borderline waif, she has the frog prince, or the frog father. And this idea is that you know how in the tales, when you kiss a frog prince, he becomes a prince and then you marry him and so on and so forth. Well, for Lawson, it's a bit like that. The borderline waif is going to put all her hopes, all her desires, all her satisfactions and all her dreams into a man. Thinking, oh, well, once I'm with him, once we're together, once I fix his problems, he's going to be there for me, he's going to love me, he's going to take care of me, and he's going to fix me. However, unfortunately, what happens is that as soon as they get what they need, those frog fathers, they leave. They abandon their wives, thus repeating the pattern of abandonment, and also abandoning the children. So the children come to never rely upon their fathers because they feel that the father, well, is not really present. Or if he's present, he's just there for the benefits of the mother, or he's just there to benefit himself rather than the whole family. Then for the hermit, we have the huntsman. So the huntsman is, very interesting enough, is a man that is very reliable, very stern, does not express feelings, but is going to do. He's going to support his borderline hermit wife. And he's going to, in a way, obey her demands. And he's going to see the world as external, as a threat, but he's going to try and placate the threat or try and contain it for the borderline. However, what is problematic is that he can't resist the borderline hermit, that he himself is like submissive to her desires, meaning that he can't really fight against, and he might protect his children indirectly, but he's not going to necessarily stand up to defend them, which, again, for the children creates a sin of father is reliable, but he's never going to oppose mother. He's never going to fight her. So if ever a shove comes to push, he's not there, or he's going to be there, but like afterwards. So this creates a dichotomy where father can be trusted to an extent. Then, for the queen, obviously, we have the king. So the king are often men who also have narcissistic issues, who themselves feel that everything is due to them. So it can work on a certain level. However, there's always going to be a point where someone is going to get disappointed. And when that happens, everything is going to come back full force, and children are going to be instrumentalized. For example, if you've seen or read What Amazing You, it's often that true powerful parents who have successful careers are going to fight over the child, but not for the love of the child, not to take care of the child, not because they feel that they can do a better job. They're going to fight because the child represents a way of getting to the other, to saying, oh, I'm a better parent, but it's for the self-esteem and not for the child. And fundamentally, that bitterness can happen very quickly and be very, very intense. The only way for the queen and the king to really get along is for the narcissistic interests to converge, for them to form a coalition that survives the outside world, that is prestigious, that is narcissistically showering for both of them. There's a shower of pride and admiration just flows continuously. If it isn't the case, then you can be sure that there's going to be a lot of internal conflict. And lastly, for the witch, it's the fisherman. So Lawson draws upon the tale of the fisherman that fished a magic fish, and then the wife told him to ask the fish some wishes. And at the end, the wife asks the fisherman to tell the fish that she wants to be God. And the fisherman's like, no, we can't do that. It's not going to work. And she insists. And through sheer terror, he's going to obey. And the fishermen men are the men who are so terrified of their wives, of their spouses, that they just go with everything. There's no limits. It's not even that they're not going to push back. It's like they're completely submissive to their wives. And they will never ever protect their children from anything, not even indirectly, right? There's no protection whatsoever. In a way, child and father are put on the same level, that both of them are terrified of the witch. And both of them are playing an internal dynamic in which who gets to get sacrificed? Is it the child or is it father? And they're both, in a way, competing against one another, not to have the good graces of the witch, but to know who's not going to get it, or not going to get punished or hurt by her. So here we have a father that's put on the same level as a child for the witch. The witch is all powerful in their mentality, in their framework, in their fantasies, is all powerful, and she controls everything. And father, child are both put on the same position of being submissive and having to deal with her. And it's who stabs who first that sins, develop. So Lawson says that those are the four main types of mothers, fathers. And she says that there's two subtypes of children. There's the all good child, which is a child in which the mother's going to see all the positive traits of herself into him, or project all of her positive fantasies into him or to her. And she's going to expect a lot of them. So often these people start to develop a lot of false selves to try and mitigate the projections of the mother. They're going to try and do everything they can to, in a way, please her. And that's going to be tricky, because even though they might get love, affection, and praise, they start to develop into who they're truly not. And who they are gets ignored. So it can be very painful. They can also go into caring professions like being a doctor, a nurse, a psychologist, a social worker. It's, in a way, they're trying to fix mother. Like, that's something they're trying to do. However, the problem is when they have siblings is that they can be an all bad child. The all bad child is, unfortunately, the person is going to receive all the self-hate, all the loathing, all the projections, all the no goodness that the mother feels in herself. She's going to expose into the all bad child. She's going to split between the all good and the all bad. And the all bad is at risk of developing borderline personality disorder and transmitting the pattern again and again and again. So how do we break free? For Lawson, it's very important for these children to seek therapy, because even if they themselves are not borderline, they often have dynamics that have been internalized, and they often don't feel free from their mother's grasp or their father's grasps. So fundamentally, the child is going to have to go through self-therapy to be able to develop a positive self-image and a righteous self-image that's not fluctuating as the gaze of the mother would. So they have to develop a deep and profound understanding of themselves. They have to affirm who they are, that they're not the mother, that they're separate, they have separate desires, and they don't want to be part of her orders or her life necessarily, but they want to be themselves, or they want to be part of her life, but in very specific conditions and circumstance, and affirming their will, like, no, they will not do that. And she says it's very important, once you've affirmed your will, that you don't go back on it. It's not something that you can negotiate. When it's no, it's no. And that's very, very true. If you're going to negotiate, you start off negotiating. If this touches a limit of what you can do or can offer, there's no negotiation. It's a no. And you have to stick to it. Because the person, once you start sticking to it, they might try and try again. But there will be a point where they won't try anymore, because the borderline will understand that there's no way. It's not going to go through. And that limit is both reassuring for the child of the borderline, even in adult form, and the mother, because she is limited, she's contained in a way. So all of this is very, very interesting. And she goes into very specific details on how to cope with the four types of borderline she presented. This book on the whole was an incredibly interesting read, and one that is accessible for everyone, be it the professional or the layman. And if you're interested whatsoever in between the dynamic between children and mother in the borderline phenomena, I highly recommend this book. So I hope you enjoy this review, and if there's anything you ever want to ask, please feel free to do it in the comments. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.